Welcome everyone to another episode of the Campus Waterfowl podcast. I'm your host Derek Christians, and it's been a while since we've had a podcast come up, just because the end of hunting season. But had an idea during the hunting season to continue getting content for you guys during the off season. And what we've come up with is kind of what I'm going to call it the just waterfowl research tour to start, but that might change over the years. But what it is now, just given our partnership with Ducks Unlimited this last season, I was able to get in contact with Dr. Mike Brazier with Ducks Unlimited, who's the waterfowl scientist. And he was able to inform me about a program called the DU Fellowship. And what I wanted to do was continue traveling around, but highlighting students during this off season. But then I think all year round, find students, grad students who are doing wetland research, waterfowl research. So from there, with that conversation with Mike Brazier, I was able to get in contact with Brett Leach here, who we have on the podcast with us today. And he is a student at the University of Missouri doing research on blue-winged teal and their migration routes and stopover sites, but just a ton of things that I'm going to let him talk about because I have no idea. I'm very new to the research side of things, but we're going to talk to him here in a bit. But before we get into the podcast, in addition to kind of the waterfowl research tour, this off season, we've been able to get in contact with some collegiate DU volunteers and highlight their volunteering experiences. Through whether it's the other week we were at DUX in Texas. Tonight I'm actually going down to Ole Miss. They're hosting a crawfish boil, and so we're going to talk to them about hosting an event like that and having a good time eating some crawfish. But then I think we'll be busy this off season, so I encourage you to tell your friends to subscribe to the YouTube channel where you can watch even this podcast that you're listening to right now, but then also learn about waterfowl research, how the research is conducted, but then also some of the preliminary results as well. And that's what we're going to be talking about today with Brett. We're going to learn a lot about Brett, his journey through, I think we're going to start all the way in high school, I think, where he decided to go this route, but then talk about his experience in college and then leading up to where he's at right now. And also talk about the process of doing this research, and some of the prelim results that he's finding.
Yeah, thanks, Derek, for that intro. As Derek said, I'm a graduate student at the University of Missouri, and I am working on a blue-winged teal telemetry project where we are basically looking at habitat selection during the non-breeding period, as well as migration phenology, so the time that these birds are initiating migration, terminating migration, the number of stopovers that they're using, and the length that they're at those stopover sites. And we're basically tracking these birds from Prairie, Canada, all the way down to South America. Do you want me to go right into my background right away, or?
Yeah, I think we might as well just jump into your background. Really, I want to ask you, like, at what point, or let's start with where you're from, where you grew up, and just growing up in that area. What was it like?
Yeah, so I'm originally from Deep Here, Wisconsin. It's in the northeast part of the state. And growing up, my grandpa and uncle were really big into hunting and fishing, so they always got me out whenever they were able to. But it was mostly like deer hunting and turkey hunting that they had grew up with. So that's what I did up until high school. And then we were at the sporting goods store with one of my buddies. I think he was 15 at the time. So he had just got his driver's license, and we happened to see some duck decoys on sale, and we're just like, I bet that'd be fun. So I think it was just some of those green headgear hot buys. It's like $25 for a dozen of them. So we each ended up buying a pack and went out to, where I ended up doing most of my hunting was on the Bay of Green Bay. So we went out there and just fell in love with the sport.
And then from there, like even in high school, did you have an understanding, or did you kind of know what you wanted to do going into college then?
Not really. So when I was in high school, I just wanted to do something that I loved. So basically anything that got me in the outdoors is what I was just broadly focused on at the time. And then,
Hmm.
so I ended up going to the University of Wisconsin Stevens Point. They've got a really good natural resource program there,
Oh yeah.
and I ended up majoring in wildlife ecology, research, and management. And like even when I first started, like I was like, do I want to do wildlife? Do I want to do fisheries? Like I was still a
Hmm.
little bit unsure, and I got involved in a student organization called SWAMP. It stands for Students for Wetland Awareness, Management, and Protection. And uh, there's a student that is working on a project where he's just going up to one of the local WMAs where he's doing waterfowl counts. And I was just like, like I got involved with that. Like I absolutely love duck hunting and I love getting out in the marsh. And I was just like, I think that's the route that I want to go.
Hmm. Hmm. But then, so I guess what made you pick the waterfowl side of things more specifically? Because even in high school, you mentioned like that was kind of a thing that you just picked up at a sporting goods show or a sporting goods store.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just like so growing up on the Bay of Green Bay, like I definitely saw like the habitat changes that
Hmm.
they're facing and everything. So that part just like really interested me, as well as I guess just like how unique waterfowl actually are. Like you're managing for a bunch of different species, whereas like if you're like a deer biologist, you're just focused on like I guess like in Wisconsin now you're gonna be focusing on like your whitetail and elk. Um, but yeah, just like the diversity of waterfowl species and just like how unique each species is what really hooked me on with waterfowl.
Hmm. And at what point in college did you make that like you decided to do waterfowl? Did you say more or
I
to
think it
focus
was
on waterfowl?
about my junior year is when
Junior
I
year.
really decided that that's the route that I wanted to go.
And so in those programs, like I was a student, did my undergrad at South Dakota State. I was an econ major, but I had friends and know people who've gone through like the wildlife and fisheries programs. And I know what I've heard is that it can be very competitive program. I feel like even across the country, just because how limited jobs are, and then just getting experience is another thing. And so throughout um, high school and then even college, did you have opportunities to volunteer and get like in the field experience to kind of separate you from a lot of other students?
Yeah, so uh, the University of Wisconsin Stevens Point, they're really good about just all the organizations that they've got available. So like there's the Wildlife Society, and then like the program I was just telling you about before, like the Students for
Hmm.
Wetland Awareness, Management, Protection, and they've got like all sorts of different organizations like that. So it's just they've got a bunch of different projects going on, so you can like get your name on a list and just become involved that way and start building up your resume. But also like don't be afraid to like reach out to your like local Department of Natural Resources or anything like that. So throughout my college career, I ended up volunteering with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources with uh, their goose banding and their duck banding as well. And like just having that experience is also what really kind of drove me to like the waterfall side of things. Like I absolutely love getting out and catching some birds and just getting out in the field. But yeah, like you're saying, it's a pretty competitive field. But like once you can like start making those connections, like everybody knows everybody. So as long as like you're
Hmm.
working hard and just like trying to get that experience, for me it seems like each job that I ended up working just kind of fell into one another. So right after I graduated from Stevens Point, I ended up going out working for Ducks Unlimited in the Prairie Pothole region of North Dakota.
Okay.
And I was working on their oil and gas disturbance study that they're doing out there. And it was just like an awesome experience. And like I would definitely suggest like if you're interested in this field, like don't be afraid to get out and move around, especially with these technician jobs. So you're only working a few months at a time. So a lot of those positions, it's like 3 to 10 months long, and you just can kind of travel around. And I end up going from North Dakota all the way down to Louisiana, and it's just getting that unique perspective of like the challenges that waterfowl are facing on the breeding grounds all the way down to the wintering grounds.
And you're doing that. So how does that then work with like classes and things like that? Like especially like during undergrad, I feel like you might be kind of limited with your time of how much experience you can actually get volunteering and traveling. What was that like, kind of balancing those two things with all that undergrad stuff going on and then trying to get experience?
For me, it honestly wasn't too bad because a lot of the work that
Was it?
they're doing, like they're going out on the weekends, and then I guess like with Stevens Point, it's kind of unique that they had like a sanctuary right by the campus, so they did a lot of research
Hmm.
out there, so you could easily go out there for an hour or two during the week as well, and not really mess with your classes too much. Otherwise, just like with the duck banding, a lot of that is going to be the preseason banding period. So it's not going to be while you're actually like in or while you have classes or anything like that. Just during the summer months.
Hmm. And then did you guys do your fair share of hunting in the fall and into the winter as well then up there?
No, yeah.
I hear Stevens Point's a hot spot. Like, well, even I feel like a lot of Wisconsin schools, and there's a lot of them that they do a good amount of hunting and they do pretty well. But Stevens Point's kind of, I feel like, at the top. But I'm sure I'll get some messages now from all the other schools.
No, yeah.
But are you guys getting like puddle ducks mostly? Is it you guys hunting just marshes and open fields in that area then too?
So I honestly never spent much time hunting open fields other than for Canada geese.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, a lot of these like heavy marshes that we're hunting, we're shooting a lot of puddle ducks. Otherwise, like I spent a lot of time, like I said, going back to Green Bay and hunting diver ducks over there because that's
Oh yeah.
that's one thing I really fell in love with was the diver hunting that Green Bay offers.
Mm-hmm. Are you guys? And then I just wanted to kind of touch on the hunting stuff before we get into the next step is your grad study. But like up in the Green Bay, are you guys hunting a lot of the shore for the divers, or are you guys doing open water hunts in that area?
So most of my experience has just been from shore, but there definitely are a lot of guys going out doing like the layout boats and all that. And
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, I just haven't had that opportunity to actually get out there and do that, just because like growing like I guess like throughout college, like none of my buddies like we really didn't have a boat that would be suitable for like layout boat hunting or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, now I've been out of Wisconsin for quite a while now. So one of
Because
these,
yeah, you're in Missouri now, right?
yeah,
Is
that's
that
correct.
you're in Missouri? So yeah, let's pivot then. Let's talk about some of your going to grad school now. So why did you choose the University of Missouri?
So I guess like taking a step back, I was working down in Louisiana for the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries on one of their speckle belly projects that they're working on, where they're
Oh.
looking at winter habitat use. And I worked for them for
Mm-hmm.
2 winters. And during my second year there, my boss, Paul Link, he was kind of asking me about grad school and if I'd be interested in it. And I just kind of, like, it was definitely something that I was interested in, especially just knowing that I should probably go on to get my master's if I want to keep working with waterfowl and focusing on some of the research side of things. And um, he was in contact with my advisor, Lisa Webb, at the University of Missouri, and she's just a really good movement ecologist, and that's why we ended up deciding to bring the project up there.
Okay. And that was, and just trying to get timeline together. That was just during your time, like that was after your undergrad. Like you worked for DU. You said right. You said
Yeah,
you worked for DU right out of college, and then
yeah.
was that then part of the DU, or was that you then went to go work down in Louisiana then with Paul?
So that was separate from the DU. So the DU position that I worked, it was, I think, a 4 month position. So I ended up finishing up in August, and then I stuck around for a few weeks and ended up helping volunteer with some duck banding going on at one of the local national wildlife refuges. And during that
Okay.
time, like I saw a job posting for going down to Louisiana and working on their speckle project. So I applied for that and
Gotcha.
ended up getting that position.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, it's just like you're literally all over the place, and so I just kind of just want to share with the audience to know it's like there's a lot of time from where you start and a lot of different opportunities that do come up and that you might have to take to then get to like where you're going, and so it's quite a story that you have and just all over the place. It sounds like
Yeah, so like
so.
I ended up going working for DU, and I did that for 2 summers, and then worked a couple summers in Minnesota on their duck banding crew, and then down in Nebraska, I worked on a bobwhite quail telemetry project, and then I went back up to Wisconsin, worked on a wood duck telemetry project up there, and um, after that, I went back to Louisiana, and then when that position ended, hopping back up to Wisconsin, working on their ringneck duck
Holy
breeding
smokes.
ecology project, and then back down to Louisiana. So I was definitely ready for the something a little bit more stable and uh, not hop around quite as much now.
And so when you say stable, that was the point where then you went to the University of Missouri
Yeah.
then, and um, so at that point, so like I said, kind of in the intro, Brett is a recipient of the DU Fellowship program, where one of 8 students is provided funding um, per year to further their education, but then also just wetlands conservation and waterfowl research. And so Brett, he was recipient of that, and was that
Uh,
2020,
yeah, 2020 I applied, and
2020?
yeah.
2020, 2021 is when he was awarded the I gotta get the is it the Bonnie Castle Fellowship
Yep,
of Waterfowl
that is correct.
and Wetland in Research, and so and that's how I got in contact with him because Mike Brazier mentioned like yeah he's doing some awesome stuff and with timing it just worked out perfect where when when I did reach out to Mike and then we got in contact with Brett that he was actually going to be doing his research down in Louisiana. Literally, I don't know, less than a month when we reached out to him. It seemed like, and so I packed my bags, went down to Louisiana, and was able to meet Brett and as well as Paul Link. So that was an incredible experience, being able to witness just that entire process firsthand, and learned a lot during my time there. But Brett, can you talk about kind of how you got introduced to the fellowship? Was it your advisor who kind of encouraged you to apply for that fund?
Yeah, so like if you're like really interested in waterfowl, there's like a listserv out there that you can become a part of, and you can see a lot of these announcements come through. And so I saw that come through, and then my advisor also mentioned like you should really apply for this fellowship. Like the funding for my project, like it wasn't uh, quite like all the way funded, but from the time that I
Mhm.
started the actual project, and just being able to receive the uh, fellowship award, was able to complete the funding portion of the project.
Very cool. And then even I guess we didn't even talk about this. How did this project even come up? Was this a were you kind of continuing the research that they were doing already at the University of Missouri, or were you kind of the one who started it, or you and your advisor the one who started it?
So it all kind of goes back to Paul down in Louisiana. So uh, there's the company that we're using for the transmitters is Ornatella. They're based out of Lithuania, and they finally came out with a transmitter that was small enough and light enough to be able to put on a blue wing teal. And there's just a
Okay.
lot of unknowns when it comes to like particularly like the non-breeding period for blue wings. So it's just a perfect opportunity, just like all the stars aligned, and we were able to start the project up at the University of Missouri.
And then and that started in yeah, you said 2020, 2021. That really got
So
the
we ended up having our pilot season in the spring of 2019. So it was like a full year before I even started grad school. It's like I was in contact with my advisor, and like we were pretty sure that I was going to end up being the graduate student for the project. and we're just waiting for like I guess like all the forms and everything to go through and just to make it official.
Mm-hmm.
But so like while I was working for Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, I started putting these transmitters out in the spring of 2019, and then they sent me up to Saskatchewan in the fall to put transmitters out up there as well. And then yeah, so like every fall, well, so we originally went to Saskatchewan in the fall, and then COVID happened, and we ended up relocating to South Dakota from there. But then, yeah, in the springtime, we go down to Louisiana every year to mark these birds as they're migrating back north.
Gotcha. And then where should we go from here? We need to um, talk about now just the process. Well, what you said, it's important to know this type of research because there hasn't been much research done on blue winged teal, especially like I feel like the banding been going on for quite some time,
Yeah, banding's been
but
going on for a while.
it's like the transmitter technology, the geolocating technology that's new. Where now, how is that important? Knowing that set of data important for just understanding blue winged teal.
Yeah, so blue winged teal, they're different than all other dabbling duck species, so we can't really rely on like the information that we're getting from like mallards or pintails or anything like that. Just because blue winged teal, they are an early fall migrator and a late spring migrant as well. And they also wintered further south and more widespread than any other North American species of waterfowl. So like, these birds are going all the way down into South America and during the winter, and then all the way up to Prairie Canada during the breeding season. But yeah, like we do have banding data for blue winged teal, but you can't really like infer the time of migration or anything like that. Just because once those birds get south of the U.S. border, those band reporting rates significantly drop off. Even though we know a large portion of those blue wings are wintering south of the border.
Gotcha. And yeah, like given that it's so new that this technology has been around, it's like what can this lead to, and like what kind of findings are you guys able to find? So I think it's pretty exciting here in the coming years, where you actually, when you write your report and everyone's kind of able to see this and kind of look back on it for like future projects and things. So it's pretty awesome. But let's talk about just the process of obtaining the birds, and then also with the transmitter technology. So you mentioned that you go up to, you said South Dakota this last year just because of COVID,
Yeah.
but during the fall, correct?
Mm-hmm.
During the winter, or the winter back, and then the springtime you're in Louisiana. And that happens. So you're putting on transmitters twice a year, correct?
Yep.
And then can you go through the process of like what it's like on site in those locations, of what's going on and who's all involved, and kind of just really what I got to experience this other week.
Yeah, so I'll start up in South Dakota. So uh, it's in conjunction with the Mississippi Flyway Council. So they've got a preseason duck banding crew, and they were out of Saskatchewan and COVID, so then we ended up relocating to South Dakota for that reason. But I mean, South Dakota, it's still like a breeding hotspot for blue wings. So when we're up there, we're using swimming traps. It's basically just taking chicken wire and you make a circle that has a funnel on it on one side, and you put your bait on the inside, and the birds just kind of follow that trap around. And we're out there checking those traps every day. So just making sure that those birds aren't being held too long in those traps. And then it's like the crew with the Mississippi Fire Council, it's of 3 people. So it works out great for trying to get these transmitters out. So we're banding every bird that we end up catching, and then one person can record all the data as I'm reading off the numbers, and one person holding the bird, and so I fit the bird with the transmitter.
Mm-hmm. And how many transmitters are you putting out per, like when you guys are up in South Dakota and Louisiana?
So in South Dakota, we are doing 25 units per year, and then Louisiana, we're putting 40 out per year. So
40 per year.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
And so,
oh, go ahead.
I'm just trying to think like, so we were out when I was out with you, we did, was it 12 and 12 or no, 6 and 6?
Yeah, we did 6 and 6 while you were there.
So 12. And so you got to go out a few times and put more transmitters out
So
or in this calendar year.
for our study, so we started in 2019 where we did 10 down in Louisiana and 10 in Saskatchewan. And then the following year, we were supposed to do 30 in Louisiana. And then we got hit with COVID, and we're like, we don't know if we're going to even be able to go up to the breeding grounds this year and be able to put these units out. So we ended up putting all of our units out down in Louisiana. So we ended up putting the 40 out there, and then we ended up finding some extra funding once we knew they're going to have a banding crew up in South Dakota. So we were able to get an additional, I think, 20 units, and then we had a couple recoveries that we're also deploying as well.
One thing I was kind of like new to me where when on site, like you see a lot sometimes on social media, just pictures and videos sometimes of how all this research is conducted. But one thing that kind of hit me when I was down in Louisiana was it's like you have the main people there to like help get the birds in that process of capturing them, and then banding them. Every bird's being banded, but then you have these other groups that come in that are doing waterfowl research as well. And so, like you in particular, kind of being one of them. But then also when I was there, they were doing research on avian influenza,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's another group doing avian coronavirus. And so, and I can't remember where they're coming from, but it's kind of interesting how when birds are available that when captured, other groups are able to come in and make it as efficient and effective as possible. So that way you're not having different groups out capturing birds and things. So I thought that was really interesting witnessing while I was there.
Yeah, so with this project, so Paul is always, I think the last 10 years, he's been capturing blue-winged teal in the springtime. And that was all for like the University of Georgia, where those two gals are coming over to sample for avian influenza. So it's kind of a long-term project that they've been working on. And that's why we end up catching birds down in Louisiana in the springtime, just because birds are already being caught already. And end up working out pretty well, putting more units out in the springtime there, just because we are catching large number of birds at a time. So down there we're using rocket nets, and just because these birds like do build up on the bait piles, we end up basically just trying to find as many volunteers as we can get out there. So we've got school groups coming from like Texas and Indiana and all over the place that are coming down to help remove these birds from the net as quick as possible. And that way they're also getting the experience of banding and helping out with putting these transmitters on and everything.
Yeah, for sure. And there was people there of all ages helping out, and that was really cool to see and have like even the younger folks that were there have that opportunity to be there and help and just how quick everything happened. Like we were waking up at like 2:30. Was it like 2:30 in the morning? We were waking up. That's earlier than duck season and stuff. And so like when you told me that, I was like, God, you gotta be kidding me. Like I thought I'd get to sleep in on some of these.
No, thanks for some long
But
days.
yeah, like up at 2:30, and then I guess after that, like so the net on this the way we were capturing the birds in Louisiana is that net is already all set out on the bank beforehand, correct? Or were you guys setting that up that evening or that morning?
So we'll have like the net laid and everything the day before. So we'll make sure that there's plenty of bait and everything to keep the birds interested for like when we're actually trying to do the rocket netting. But then in the morning when we show up, then we'll put the charges in and get everything wired up, and then stretch the cord back to the blind where we're going to end up sitting when we shoot the net.
Gotcha. And I should mention too, like everyone listening and watching this podcast, so the podcast will come out first, but then in a few days I'll have a video up for you to watch of our experiences there in Louisiana, capturing the birds, and then having Brett even kind of talking about a lot what we're going to be discussing in this podcast, but you'll be able to witness it firsthand of on site and in the field. So, but then yeah, from there, it wasn't. I've heard it wasn't the easiest time of year, right, or when capturing these blue-winged teal, because a lot of them that we were finding were they would swim up to the bait, but then they would kind of fly off the bait, where rather than sometimes they would kind of group up and stay there. And so in the video, you'll be able to see that. But how many, but how long were we even in the blind waiting before the charge went?
I'm trying to think. What was it? Maybe 40 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. And so with Paul, like he's the one, the man behind the button, I guess.
Yeah.
How does that work with like kind of in the mornings? I remembered you guys were mentioning like shooting times or like when he can shoot. Is it kind of the same thing like during hunting season where shooting times, or with him, is he able to shoot kind of before like your typical shooting, like hunting season shooting time, as long as he has the shot?
Yeah, so it doesn't really matter as long as we can make sure that like when we shoot the net off that there's not gonna be like birds up on the bank or anything like that. So we want to make sure all those birds are like butts in the air on the bait pile in the water.
Okay.
So it's just making sure we have enough light for that. But unfortunately, like when you're there, those birds weren't cooperating all that well. So like those birds would get
No.
up on the bait pile and they flush pretty much immediately. So it's just a waiting game for them. And once they finally grouped up to a number that we're good with catching, then
Yeah, and it's kind of intense too, because it's kind of like Paul was kind of watching, and I would kind of watch Paul, and he was telling us even that the evening before it happened, the day before too, where the birds were fleeing off the bait. But then it's like you got to kind of pick and choose when you want to do it, because it's like the longer you wait and the more times they kind of flee off the bait, the less bait you have.
ew.
And so it's like there's a balancing act there where it's like at some point, like when do you do it? But when it does happen, it's like in the video, you'll be able to see this. It's like it is like you are going 100 miles an hour right after that. It goes from like super, super calm and like being super quiet. And then it's just like, yeah, it's game time.
Yeah, I was gonna say you got all that blind pretty quick.
Well, I didn't want to hold you guys back because I was the one closest to the door when we were down there. So. But I got to, the best part was I got to experience being down there two days, got to experience kind of the volunteer side, because the volunteers aren't there by the bait site or anything. It was just you and Paul. And then I was lucky enough to be there with you guys the second morning. But the first morning, the volunteers are probably, I don't know, few hundred yards away or whatever, but just out of sight and kind of out of the picture. But they're able to hear the net go off, and then once that hits, it's like, all right, they're on a trailer behind a side by side, and it's like everyone's running to the site to get those birds out from underneath the net. And it does not take too long, and so very impressed on how you guys went about all of that and how quick it did happen. But then, so after you do get the birds in those crates, what happens then after that?
Yeah, so once we get the birds all loaded up on the trailers, we end up driving back out just so we can get a little bit further away from the site so birds can start coming back and getting comfortable with feeding at the site again, because he tries to shoot these sites every single week during the spring migration period. But yeah, so as soon as we get far enough away from the site, we end up just getting all the birds off the trailer so that way they can get the wind start blowing through them a little bit better and dry out. And usually after a few minutes, these birds will start drying out good enough where I can get these transmitters put out on these birds. So Paul will start getting all the birds, let me think. So he'll start by getting start banding all the birds, and then he'll whenever he comes across a hen that feels like it's a healthy bird, he'll put it aside in a separate crate, and those are the birds that I'll end up weighing and making sure that they all meet weight. So these transmitters are 10-gram units, and there are some rules that we have to follow. Like the unit can't exceed more than like 3% of the bird's body weight. Um, so yeah, so all the birds I had marked, they have to be at least 330 grams. But like I also like finding these birds where like when you feel like if you can feel that keel bone, I try not selecting those birds just because I want to know like that bird's about as fat as it's gonna get, and then that way the
Mm-hmm.
units properly fit on the bird.
Gotcha. And they get banned. Yeah, they get banded by Paul, and then they go. Do they just go straight to you?
Yeah, so
Is
we're
that
only marking the
that's how?
adult females, and so he'll put the
Yeah.
adult females in a separate crate that'll go to me.
And why just females?
So when you think about um, like I guess like the population of blue wings, or I guess all dabbling ducks in general. So males generally are more abundant than females. So a lot of these females, they're the ones taking the risk. So like they're going to be the ones sitting on the nest where they're more likely to be predated. So when you're thinking about like the management of blue and teal, or I guess all dabbling duck species, the female
Mm-hmm.
is the more important cohort to be studying, just because they're going to be the ones uh, basically sitting on the nest.
And then from there, after you weigh them and they do kind of qualify, they're big enough to be selected to put a transmitter on. Then what's the process of then getting the transmitter on?
Yeah, so these units, they just sit on the bird's back. Like you'll see if you guys watch the video, it's like a little solar powered unit that sits on the bird's back between the wings, and we've got two loops. So we've got a loop that goes around in front of the wings, so like in front of the shoulder joints on the bird, and then it goes around and sits on the furcula, which is just the wishbone, and that way you just make sure that that strap's not going to slide up at all. And then we've also got one back behind the wing, so it's going to basically sit as far forward, right behind those flank feathers on the side of the bird, and then in front of the bird's thigh. And that'll just
Mm-hmm.
help prevent the unit from slipping off and flopping around. So this elastic material that we're using. So since we're fitting these units when the bird's going to be about as fat as it's going to get, there's going to be like a little bit of stretch in that elastic material. So as these birds get smaller, like they'll still stay fit to the bird correctly as well.
Mm-hmm. And is this an elastic material that you guys developed? I thought it mentioned or that you guys like found or something because when I was talking to Brett or not Brett Paul when I was down there, he said like I kind of asked like is it going to deteriorate over time with the birds? And he said that he had it like just strings of it up in North Dakota going through the winters and just all these different conditions that you guys tested. So what was uh, where did you guys come across that material?
Yeah, so Paul's working, I can't remember the name of the company, but he ended up developing a 3.5 millimeter wide elastic material, whereas previously, I think it was almost 6 millimeter wide. So it's almost half
Mm-hmm.
the width of the previous material that a lot of people had been using. And just because it is a smaller bird, like if we can make the width of that material a little bit less, it's not going to be like rubbing on the bird's thigh or anything like that, just because we are able to get that strap further forward on the bird. So
Mm-hmm.
end up working out really well.
Yeah. And so now, once you do have all the teal that you needed, then what's the process then of releasing them? Like,
So what we end up doing is, especially like in the springtime where we have a large number of volunteers, we'll hold uh, birds without transmitters in a crate as well. And then that
mm-hmm.
way everybody will grab a bird, and then however many transmitters I've got, I'll grab enough volunteers to hold those. And what we'll do is we'll just line up in a line, and we'll let everybody with the unmarked or without a transmitter on the bird release their birds in like a split second we blah, before we release these transmitted birds, and then that way they just have a bird to follow as they fly off, and they seem to fly off a lot better when they got a bird where they're watching these birds fly off in different directions.
Yeah. And then after that point, like, yeah, birds are gone. Your research is, or the process of obtaining and getting the transmitters out is all done. at what point do those transmitters start sending information back to like you or sending data back to you?
So we've got like we're able to program all these units to like whatever we want it to be set to. So we've got ours programmed to check in once every day, and then these are just using cell towers to be able to transmit the data. So if the bird's not within reach of a cell tower, then it'll just store all the data on the unit, and then the next time that it's close enough to the cell tower at that specific time of day when it's supposed to check in, then it'll transmit all that data. But we've got our location data to set to get a coordinate every 1 to 4 hours, depending on battery life. So we're getting a lot of data with these units.
Yeah. So you said 1 to 4 hours.
Yeah.
It's kind of getting a checkpoint, and then the data is getting sent back after a 24-hour period.
Yeah, that is correct.
Okay. And then just to reiterate more, so yeah, if you're away from if it's far enough away from a tower where it can't connect, or if it's low battery, it just that's all stored internally then, all those data points.
Yeah,
and then
we've had some of our birds, like especially once they get like south of the border and on the breeding grounds, cell coverage really isn't all that great. But we've had birds offline for up to 10 months, and then it's still able to transmit all that data. So they've got a pretty large storage capacity.
That's got to kind of be rewarding when that happens.
Yeah.
Like you think a bird's like gone, but it's like, yeah, when it does come back online after that long, it's like you gotta celebrate a little bit, and then you get all that data to go through. But so then, how many transmitters do you guys have out right now?
I think we're up to 175 deployments.
175. And then that's all within, is it the central flyway, or is it all kind of scattered now at this point?
So most of these birds are going throughout the Mississippi and central flyway. We've got a few birds that end up going to the Atlantic flyway as well. So I think we've had 2 go to South Carolina and then 1 down in Florida. But yeah, otherwise, just like during the wintering period, we've got birds. Most of them seem to be like Louisiana, a little bit Texas, otherwise a lot in Mexico, Honduras. I think this last year we had some down in Belize, and the first year of the project we had birds going down to Venezuela and Colombia as well. So
that's crazy.
A little bit all over the place.
And then do you know, and that's the crazy thing, yeah, blue-winged teal, it's like, yeah, their wintering grounds, they're just kind of all over the place compared to other ducks. Do you know if there's other people out there in like even like the Pacific and the Atlantic flyway that are doing this type of research and seeing some of the blue-winged teal's migration paths in those flyways?
I think, well, so for blue-winged teal, the technology is like really new. So we really don't, I guess personally, I don't know who all is also working on similar things. I want to say that there was a group in California that might have put some units on blue wings, but other than that, there was a transmitter study that I guess they also worked with Paul on that. They deployed some units down in Louisiana, but it was on, I believe, adult males, but it's for a different research objective. They're looking just kind of broadly where these birds were going. So,
and then you said what? Can you go over your research objective again?
Yeah, so I'm working on habitat selection during the non-breeding period, so spring and fall migration during the wintering time. So yeah, we're looking at 4 different habitat categories right now. So we're looking at emergent herbaceous wetlands, woody wetlands, open water, and cultivated crop, and just seeing like what's available to them and what they're selecting for. And then we're also
so it's not necessarily. Say that again. Oh no, you can go ahead.
All right. Yeah, and then we're looking at migration phenology as well. So just the timing of migration and the use of these stopovers and how long they're spending at each of these stopover sites.
Okay. And can we are we able to kind of discuss some of the preliminary results that you've been finding, and any surprises that you've come across?
Yeah, so yeah, like you said, these are all preliminary results. So we've still got data rolling in, so we're trying to incorporate these as we
Hmm.
go. But from one of the presentations that I'd given earlier this year, I think is up until we had data until like the spring of 2021 that we included in it. So just looking at like migration initiation, like I said, like these birds are uh, late spring migrants. So like they're not. Let me see. I got it pulled up right here. Um, so yeah, we're finding like a mean departure date of April 22nd for when they're actually leaving these wintering grounds. And
Okay.
I guess it's like, to me, like the surprising part was like how long these birds are staying like in their wintering patterns. So
Hmm.
basically like what they're doing from the time that they arrived until the time that they left, most of those birds never left like a 5 kilometer area. So
Jeez.
yeah, so these birds are getting in an area and hardly ever leaving it. But yeah, and then a lot of these birds are, we found a mean arrival date to the breeding grounds of May 11th. So I guess that kind of lines up well with when a lot of these birds are initiating nests up on the breeding grounds. And then
Hmm.
I guess kind of going into fall migration, it is important to keep in mind that we're only marking adult females. So we know that adult males, they migrate earlier. So um, I definitely wouldn't be looking at these numbers and be like, oh, we need to move our teal seasons or anything like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so in the fall, we end up finding that a lot of these birds, they're not departing until late September, and then they're arriving to their wintering grounds late October. So
Hmm.
I guess just like if you start looking at like the duration of migration for these birds, like in the spring, we found that it's uh, right around between like 4 and I think 30 days that it's taking these birds to migrate from the wintering grounds to the breeding grounds. And that it does line up with previous Dale and duck research uh, for
Hmm.
how long it takes to get up there. Even
And you said, what was that again? 4 to 7 days,
4 to 30 days.
or
So
oh,
it's
four to
pretty
30 days.
variable between birds. Like,
Yeah, there is a range there.
yeah.
Hmm.
And then I think it was during the, let me pull it up so I don't get it wrong here. Yeah, so then like I guess like the mean was right around 20 days in the spring for how long it took them to get there.
Okay, to get back up.
And then in fall, it was also very variable for when these um, how long it's taking these birds to get to the wintering ground. So it ranged between like
Yeah.
a day and a half and 45 days.
Holy
Yeah.
smoke. Do you think like those ranges will then like slowly come or like reduce over time as you get more data, and then as maybe potentially over the years like more people doing this type of research, and you can kind of dial in on lower like uh closer ranges, I guess?
I mean, you get a lot of variability between birds, so it really just kind of depends on like if the bird's getting like all the nutrients and everything that it needs to be able to complete migration. So if it makes like a
Hmm.
big jump from like South America to like say Louisiana, it's gonna have to stop and rest for a while, especially just after that making that big migration across the Gulf. Um, but so I think you're still gonna see these like large um, gaps of time where it's
These
yeah,
ranges.
but
Hmm.
where you're gonna see your differences would be like the if you look at like the mean duration time.
Okay.
So like in the fall, we end up finding a mean duration of about 30 days, so about 10 days longer than
Hmm.
spring migration. And if you start thinking about it, like it makes sense. Like in the fall, they don't really have those pressures, but they have to get south. Whereas like in the springtime, a lot of these birds, they're going up to the breeding grounds and they've got to find a suitable nesting site. So it makes
Hmm.
sense that
Hmm.
in the spring that'd be a little bit less.
Hmm. And you also mentioned like so the stopover sites are like during the migration, like how many times they're stopping
Hmm.
in places. Did you mention the number or how many times are on average are they stopping during the migration to and from, I guess?
Let's see. I gotta see if I can find this again, or else I'm gonna get those numbers wrong.
No, take your time.
Let me see if I have it in this other.
I think it's cool. Yeah, like this is like first research or like yeah the first research that has been done on this kind of stuff, and so being able to hear you talk about it and share with us, it's uh, pretty awesome.
All right, yeah. So in the spring, we end up finding that on average it'd be about 5 sites that these birds are stopping at,
But
whereas
really.
and it ranged between like 2 and 7. So um,
Mhm.
a little bit of variability. So like, I mean, it could just be like a weather system's coming through, and it's just not energetically like as feasible for these birds to be migrating, so they might have to stop as well. But
Yeah.
and then if you start looking at like fall, they end up stopping at fewer sites during the fall. So it's the mean was right around 3 sites that these birds are stopping at, and then
Mm.
um, and so like in the springtime they're obviously stopping at more sites. So like the duration at each of those sites, it was a little bit uh, less in the spring, so it was right around 4 days at each of these sites, whereas in the fall it was almost 9 days that these birds are stopping.
It's a lot of information to take
It
in a
is.
short amount of time. I'm trying to just kind of go through it in my head, that way I can have a follow-up question. um, but so when it comes to like obviously I think the weather has a big thing or a big impact on when these birds are leaving to and from their fall and or when they're starting their fall and spring migration routes. Are you guys like taking in account those maybe those bigger storms of when those storms are occurring or like whenever those pressure changes happen? Or are you using research from other projects to kind of take in account?
So we haven't taken that into account at all yet. It is something I'm interested in, but it might be a little bit beyond like what I'm uh, trying to do for like my master's work. But
Hmm.
I mean, I think they're talking about bringing or try to bring another student on to work with the data as well, and that is definitely something that people could be looking into. So just trying to figure out what these drivers of migration are for blue wings, just because like obviously it's not. I mean, I guess they're just not quite as um, weather driven as like say like a pintail or a mallard, where like
Okay.
everything's freezing up on them as they're
Yeah.
migrating south.
They just kind of have the thing in their head. They're like, "Oh, it's that time of year.
Yeah,
Let's head out."
but no, definitely
Huh.
something for future research to be looking at.
Mhm. And what about so your research that you're doing? How will that kind of like what kind of changes do you kind of see happening, or just having this data now? How will that help make decisions, kind of for all of us who are maybe waterfowl hunters or even outside of our realm of for just research purposes? How does your research benefit, I guess, society?
I guess like the biggest thing, since we're looking at migration phenology and habitat selection, just knowing like when these birds are actually migrating through an area. So we're also kind of looking at like the critical breeding, stopover, and wintering areas, so we can kind of focus on uh, which regions are most important for blue-winged teal, and just making sure that people are able to provide that habitat when these birds are actually coming
Mhm.
through an area, and being able to provide the habitat that they're actually selecting for.
Gotcha. So it is benefiting society, but it's more importantly benefiting the blue wing teal.
Yeah, and I mean,
Should
like, if you start looking at like a lot of these transmitter birds, like the level of fidelity that they have to these sites is actually
hmm
pretty high. So these birds are going back to the same sites that they were previously at. So, say like if you're managing your own wetland, just making sure you've got water at a particular time. So like a lot of these I guess especially with blueing, since they're migrating early, people may not have the water available across the landscape like they do, like say when mallards start showing up. So just being able to provide like some of that early habitat would be beneficial for hunters as well.
Man, I don't know. Covered a lot so far. I'm gonna make sure I don't have any other last questions. Um, Start to finish. No, I think we've kind of, and you kind of mentioned already some of the things that surprised you the most in this project, haven't you? Some of um, the sites that they're choosing, and was it the just how small of an area that they actually do cover when they in those stopover sites was more
Yeah, I
surprising to
think
you?
that was probably like one of the most surprising things for me. Is just like how small of an area that these birds were actually utilizing.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's just been really cool watching like the fidelity to these sites. So like there's a bird that we had marked up in Saskatchewan. It wintered down in the terrible marshes of Louisiana, and then it went, I think, up to South Dakota to breed, and then it went back to like the exact same part of the marsh the following winter as well.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Now with any of these like outlier blue-winged teal, I think I asked you this when I was down in Louisiana. Do you ever like name the birds of like Turbo or anything like that,
I
or like High Fly or anything?
I haven't named any of my birds yet, so if anybody's got
Dang
some
it.
good names, they can send them my way.
Just yeah, I feel like with like the data that you're getting, like there's got to be at least one bird that's maybe flying a little bit higher than all the other ones, or lower when it's flying. Because like even we didn't touch on this, but like those transmitters, like you're getting kind of like what kind of data are you getting from these transmitters?
Yeah, so these units are recording like the latitude, longitude, the speed of the bird, altitude, temperature, and we're also collecting ACC data, so it's accelerometer data, so it's getting a X, Y, and a Z position. So it basically tells you like what that unit is doing at that time, and that's been really beneficial for us just when you're looking at birds that are starting to nest, because you can see like as those birds are stationary and not moving at all, and then you can see them make their daily foraging flight, and then it
Mm-hmm.
just basically kind of like flat lines again while those birds are sitting on that nest.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know if, and we're kind of going on even another subject or like miscellaneous questions now about your project, but so now like you have all that data. Are other I don't know if it's in the research world if you can do this or not, but or say someone else is having a study, but they're studying something else, but they need that kind of same data that you're already collecting. Are they able to? Are you guys able to work in partnership to then you provide that data to them and what they're trying to find?
Yeah, that's definitely something that like we're all trying to like work together on this. So, um, I mean, there's particularly with mallards, like there's people marking birds all over the place, and I think a lot of those guys are sharing their data with each other as well. Um,
Okay.
yeah, so I think
Mhm.
Paul's working currently with like a couple different universities with the mallards that he has marked. But yeah, right now there's really not. Well, there's nobody that I know of that's actually putting these units out on blue and teal, so not a
Mhm.
whole lot of uh, collaboration with that part of it.
Gotcha. But so then now, once so what when does your project or your study kind of come to an end? Then, where you have to draw a conclusion and write the thesis and everything.
Well, I should be writing this summer, so hopefully finish up in December. Well, that's the plan at least.
That's the
Yeah.
plan, yeah. And how long of a report do you have to write? Is it like in grad school? Do they give you like a page minimum where you got to write, or as long as you have all this data or like all the information in that report uh,
It's
to share?
it's gonna be as long as we have like all of our information. Like they don't have like a
Yeah.
set page number or anything like that, but as long as we're like including like justifying like why we're doing the project, just kind of outlining our methods that we end up using and interpreting our results, and then
Hmm.
kind of using like the information and explaining like how this can benefit management.
And then from there, then say, so we're at a point where you did all the time, you put all the time and work in completing your thesis, you got the report done. What happens after that?
So I've got, I guess, like 3 different chapters I'll be writing for my thesis, and I'm hoping to be able to publish on all of them. So getting publishing in some of these scientific journals, and then just making sure that the information's out there and available to
Okay.
managers
Mm-hmm.
that we can
Mm-hmm.
better manage for blue and teal.
Mm-hmm. And then, so do you even think after grad school and then after this project, you'll continue working with blue wing teal, or will you pursue maybe other ducks or and try to do other projects?
I mean, I would definitely be interested in, like, if they bring on another student for this project, I'd be interested in helping out however I can. But I mean, I'm not strictly a blue and teal person, so I'd definitely be willing to work with all waterfowl species.
I should mention that teal beer that we were having down in Louisiana in the evenings. That, hey, because that's put up by a brewery in Louisiana, and what you and Paul were saying, 5% of those proceeds of that beer actually go toward your guys' project.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. After trying that beer, it would be pretty hard to go away from the blue wing teal, I think.
Well, all
But
the Southerners that are listening should definitely go and pick some up and try it. If
yeah.
nothing else, it's a pretty cool looking can.
But no, I think, yeah, there's a lot of different things that you're able to pick from, especially with, yeah, your experience that we were talking earlier about, and then to now your thesis kind of being the first ever to kind of be able to do this type of things. And I think for work, there's a lot of different opportunities you could go with. And so what would I should ask then too, like what would your work be like after college and everything? Like what would kind of a title, like a job title kind of that you would kind of obtain then after college?
I mean, it could be kind of variable, I guess. So
Okay.
I definitely like want to stick with like the waterfall biologist side of things. So I'd be interested in like the habitat management as well as like continuing uh, research on waterfowl as well. But I mean, there's all
Hmm.
sorts of different positions that end up opening doors too. So like I see like a lot of positions through like Ducks Unlimited and their conservation planning side of things where positions are opening up, and that'd definitely be something that I'd be interested in as well.
Yeah, it's whenever you see or whenever I see kind of just titles come up, there's just so many different ones. And then too, talking with students during the tour this last season, like just different all the terminology that they're talking, it's like they sound similar, but they're very different at the same time. And so trying to me trying to figure out, and I think the audience trying to figure out too, what's out there for them and what you guys are doing, bring some clarity a little bit to what you guys are going for.
Mm-hmm.
So, but no, I think we're kind of wrapping up here on the podcast. Do you want to share what's a good way to get in contact with you, Brett? And then also, if people are wanting to kind of follow your journey and your research, where's a good place for them to find that?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not really on social media much or anything, but
Come on, Brett. No.
but no, like if anybody has any follow-up questions, they can shoot me an email or anything like that. Is there a way you can add that to the screen or no?
Yeah, I can, like for the YouTube video, I can pop up something, or I can put it in the
All
description.
right.
Yeah, I can do that.
All right. But
So
yeah, so feel free to shoot me an email if you've got any questions about the research that we're working on.
but sweet. No, I can't thank you enough for allowing me to first come down there to Louisiana to be a part of that weekend of the research and you sharing with everyone about what you're doing, your journey here in the upcoming video and on this podcast, Brett. Appreciate everything that you do, your dedication to waterfowl and the research and conservation and everything. What you're doing is the first to really in the research side of things when it comes to blue wing teal and their migration routes and stopover sites and habitat selection. So I hope everyone was able to to learn something. Make sure if you are really interested in waterfowl research and biology, ecology, all this stuff, give this a second listen through, because I'm sure there might be a couple things that you might have missed with how much data we're talking about and things that Brett had mentioned. So, and don't hesitate. Like, I really encourage you to reach out to Brett if you do have any questions, because he has a ton of experience like you did here, and I'm sure he'd be more than happy to help answer any questions he might have. Brett, do you have any do you have any last advice for anyone that's listening that may be in high school, college, or in the process of kind of the same route that you might be in?
Yeah, I guess like the biggest piece of advice I could give would be just not to be afraid to reach out to people and get involved. Like I said earlier, it's a really small field where everybody knows everybody. So yeah, just reaching out to people to try and get involved as much as possible, and not be afraid to move around for a couple months and experience new areas. And I mean, you can always get back home, but I mean, just like working all these different technician jobs, like those were probably some of the greatest years that just like with all the different people I've met and everything. So yeah, just not be afraid to get involved.
There you go. All right. Well, you guys heard it from Brett himself. But Brett, I thank you for your time this morning, and yeah, jumping on this podcast means a lot. We'll get this published here on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everything, and people can give it a listen.
So, all right. Thanks for having me.
But I think, yeah, no problem. Take care, and yeah, look forward to chatting with you again once you're all done with your thesis, and we can kind of hear the final results of your project.
Absolutely.
Sweet. All right. Well, that's going to do it here for the Campus Waterfowl podcast. If you guys enjoyed this conversation, be sure to let me know, because that will give me an idea to whether or not we need to continue doing more types of having more conversations like this, and meeting up with people like Brett in the field, having them share their project or sharing their research with us, and that way gives you guys a chance to learn what's happening behind the scenes and during the off season of waterfowl hunting that we all enjoy. But I think that's going to do it here for this episode. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, and leave a comment and review the podcast as well on Apple and Spotify. But appreciate you all for listening. We'll see you all in the next one.